Srimad Bhagavad Gita. As we are commencing this scripture after a long time, I'll read the dhyana mantra, that is the mantras that are generally chanted before. And in our subsequent classes, we will take a shorter version of this. Om Partaya Pratiboditam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Kratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitaamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Astadashadhyayinim Amba Tvam Anusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim. Translation of this Sanskrit chant is: Om, O Bhagavad Gita, with which Arjuna was enlightened by the Lord Narayana himself, and which was incorporated in the epic Mahabharata by the ancient sage Vyasa. O Bhagavad Gita, you are like the Divine Mother, the destroyer of rebirth. You shower the nectar of Advaita that consists of 18 chapters. To thee, O affectionate Mother, I meditate upon. We have the first chapter called the Despondency of Arjuna. It lays down the main characters and the type of personalities in the first chapter. We will start from the second, and as we proceed, we will incorporate what has been spoken of in the first chapter. While we go ahead, we will see what exactly was the despondency. There is the Mahabharata. There was a very ancient tradition, oral tradition. And it was first called Bharata, and then it became the Mahabharata, the great Bharata. These ancient oral traditions were collected by the sage Vyasa. And it's also called the fifth Veda. We know that the sage Vyasa, he compiled the 4 Vedas. There was a mass of Vedic literature, and he rather edited this mass of literature into 4 divisions called Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sama Veda, and Atharva Veda. So we have the 4. There were some parts of the Vedas which were lost due to time, due to certain diseases that wiped out sometimes the families or the villages, or any other reason, some parts of the Vedas which were given to them for their safekeeping was lost. But lost in the sense, it's just physically lost. These mantras are spiritual mantras and they exist in the spiritual realm. So Vyasa, who was called the one with a great intellect, he meditated on those spiritual realms and he once again brought back those teachings. But now he incorporated them in all those oral traditions that were current. And that's the reason why we have today, in its properly edited form, 100,000 stanzas. That makes it one of the largest and the most comprehensive epic. We have other epics, but then this is, it takes, it beats everyone hands down. We have 100,000, but then we should not just become so selfish and say this teachings are only meant for human beings. There is a tradition, oral tradition, and rightly so, that this world of, you can say, matter and spirit that we see around is just a kind of you can say the tip of a kind of iceberg. So we have a Mahabharata meant for teaching us on this level of perception. There is a hidden Mahabharata, and they say that is 200,000 verses in the Gandharva Loka, 300,000 in the Pitri Loka, 400,000 in the Siddha Loka, and 500,000 in the Deva Loka. It keeps on and on and on. So even those beings, celestial, semi-celestial beings, they too, they are acquainted with this scripture. I don't know anyone who has ever memorized the whole thing, but the very fact that it's an oral tradition implies that there was memorization. And Vyasa, the sage Vyasa, he goes around the nation and picks up stories and incorporates them. And this is what we have, the whole of the Mahabharata. We find a kind of a continuity of thought first. You can see that it's one person who has done it. You don't get multiple authors. You can finely distinguish their styles of authorship, if there were. So in the Mahabharata you find the language is Sanskrit, and this language, Sanskrit means polished. Samskrita means it's polished. What language we have in the Vedas, it's called a Vedic Sanskrit. It's not yet grammatically perfect. While here in this Mahabharata, it's almost perfect. The language is superb. And the whole of this Mahabharata of 100,000 stanzas follow a kind of a set pattern, a set, you can say, meter. There are variations. And if you look at it from the standpoint of poetry, there's nothing so sublime than this poetry. We have like I said, it is considered the fifth Veda. Its standing is as important as the four Vedas in its holiness. The Vedas, as we know, are the foundational scriptures. It's from there where everything has issued out, directly or indirectly. And we see the end portions of the Vedas, they are called Upanishads. Upanishads are a mass of literature towards the end of the Vedas. It simply means you sit down near a teacher and learn. The other meaning is the secret knowledge. There is another word for this Upanishad which is called Vedanta, the end of the Vedas. Anta is end, Vedas, the end of the Vedas. What's the end of the Vedas? The end of the Vedas is liberation. And it is this liberation that it confers on those who practice its teachings. The Vedas have no end. They are beginningless and endless. You must remember that. Say, how can a scripture be beginningless and endless? The Vedas, according to tradition, is nothing but the mind of God. He created this universe out of the Vedas. Here we are. So if it's the mind of God, God is infinite, the mind of God ought to be infinite also. There cannot be a starting point and an ending point. In that case, you'll have to have a starting point or Big Bang or whatever for God also, for creation as well, which we will get into a kind of a infinite regressus ad infinitum. It's called anavastha dosha. So, what was the first, you can say, entity, whether it's a chicken or an egg? So there are some who look at a chicken and say it's a chicken. Some will say you cannot have a chicken without an egg. And then where does the egg come from? And from the chicken. And from where the chicken come from the egg. So it a kind of a circular, you can say, argument. So this is, they cut it straight. There is no beginning and there is no end. Simple. It's a cyclic process. Over and over and over, these things are revealed. There is also the idea that now the essence of the Vedas are in the Upanishads, and the essence of the Upanishads are in the Bhagavad Gita. So understanding or reading this Bhagavad Gita gives you an insight into the whole mass of literature called Upanishads as well as the Vedas. There was one Swami who was a disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. He was a great, you can say, monk. He used to meditate for almost a week on just one stanza of the Bhagavad Gita. And it is so deep, so profound. So, as we keep on reading, understanding this, the Sanskrit part, we will read it, and then we'll give you the translation. But Sanskrit has another, you can say, effect. Like it's polished, perfected. And the same thing happens to our minds when we read these books. It polishes, It removes the angularities, makes the mind burnished, makes the mind shine with that knowledge which is inherent in all beings. We also, in the colophon of each chapter, we have two important words called Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre. It is the knowledge of Brahman that is being discussed by the teacher Arjuna by Sri Krishna with his disciple Arjuna. So it's a knowledge of Brahman, number one. Number two is the scripture on yoga, Yoga Shastra. These two are very ancient traditions in India, this Brahma Vidya Sampada. So even monks of the Ramakrishna Order, they fall under the Brahma Vidya Sampradaya, under the traditions of the monks who, you can say, profess the knowledge of Brahman. And again, like I said, it's an equally ancient tradition of yoga. So this book gives you an advantage of being in that old tradition of the knowledge of Brahman, as well as the tradition of yoga, as well as we have seen, you don't become a Vedic, you can say Pandit, but you can understand the Vedas much more clearly in the light of the Bhagavad Gita. Most of the other scriptures, there's a triad. The Bhagavad Gita, higher than that is the Brahma Sutra, and higher than that is the Upanishads. These three form the triad on which the scripture of Advaita Vedanta stands. The Upanishads, as we've seen, they are the secret knowledge. Then they were harmonized in something called the Brahma Sutra. It's aphorisms on Brahman, where certain contradictory teachings, apparently contradictory teachings, are harmonized logically. And then to bring that teachings in the practical world is this Bhagavad Gita. So we have, it's called what you have heard, the Shruti, the oral traditions. The Upanishads come in the Shruti. That is sacrosanct. You cannot change the word. You cannot do anything to it. It's fixed. That which was heard, that which was seen by the sages and handed down generation after generation, so that they had a tradition. Then we have the logical, you can say, dimensions, the aphorisms on Brahman. Okay. Shruti, Yukti, Anubhuti. Yukti is true. Logic, everything is. Okay. Because when we read these teachings, one has to, dwell on them, ruminate on them constantly. It's only then can you get the real idea of what exactly this teacher is trying to explain to us. And when you cogitate on this, you have certain doubts arising in your mind. Those are dealt with in the aphorisms of Brahma Sutra. And now you've got to practicalize it. Carl Jung makes a very, you can say, pertinent, you can say, statement. And statement in the sense, his idea was that intellect and the emotion have to be combined. And that intellect and emotion, once combined, has to be brought down in the body. It has to be embodied. Otherwise, we think something, we do something else. Or we say something, we mean something else. That cannot be. The personality has to be kind of uniform, integrated. That's what he means. Until and unless the personality integrated, how do you do it? You don't need to go through a separate kind of spiritual practice. Reading the Bhagavad Gita itself will integrate. So these are the practical applications of Vedic theology, the Bhagavad Gita. Then, whether it's really practical or no, they claim it's practical. Yes, it's practical. Most of the scriptures are given probably in caves or in temples or in forest universities. There were these universities, kind of a college where the guru used to teach sometimes hundreds of students. And that life was extremely disciplined there. So there were teachings given out in those gurukulas, those forest colleges. There were some in the caves in the Himalayas, the sages used to meditate. This has been laid down on the battlefield. So you can understand that these teachings can be applied even on the battlefield where there is no, you can say, guarantee that you may be alive the next moment. A missile might come and finish you off. And in the din of war, and in the old days you had the neighing of horses, the chariots, and the shouting, and the banging of the shields with their swords. It's a kind of a clamor, a tumultuous, you can say, noise. There's another, in the Bhagavad Gita itself, tumultuous. The word is tumulo, so tumulo bhayan. You will find that this Sanskrit language is not something alien or something like that. You will find cognate words in the English language. In fact, it's part of the Indo-European group of languages. There we are. We have in our mind, before we can go to the actual stanza, these are not called, you can say, mantras, as we say in Vedic mantras or Upanishadic mantras. These are called stanzas, sloka. That's a mantra, sloka. But each word is power-packed. It has within itself the knowledge which is tremendous. So it can be regarded also as mantras. In human minds, there are two main characteristics. Swami Vivekananda explains. He said there are two beautiful Sanskrit words. One is pravritti and one is nivritti. Vritti is common. Vritti is, he translates that pravritti is circling forward. And nivritti means circling inwards. Vritti, like chitta vritti, there's a wave in the mind. So certain things impel you outside. That's the, you can say, characteristics of our bodies and mind. You keep a person in a room by himself or herself, and you see what happens. First thing that person will do is try to come to the window or door, try to break open. Is fed up of staying alone. That's pravritti, it pushes you out. And then there's again, at one point of time, there's an exhaustion. You circle out, you go out, and then there comes a reaction, an exhaustion, or a kind of a enough. I've had enough, I've seen enough, I've eaten enough. Then the circling inward begins. So both these, the centrifugal and the centripetal forces, joy and sorrow, love and hatred, and purity and impurity and sin and virtue, all these are nothing but the duality we talk about, but they are the result of pravritti. The mind flows outwards. It's actually, it flows outwards, kind of in concentric circles. It goes out, there. And then probably it gets hit there through something, as is the case in mostly it's like that, and then circles back. So there's a power of doing and a power of staying quiescent. Both these powers are there in the mind. What has that got to do with us? It keeps our society and it keeps our physical and mental health stable. Imagine if you would have kept on and on and on, keeping on shooting and killing, and there wouldn't be any society. Some guy is saying enough. Let's have a kind of a compromise, let's have a kind of a dialogue, let's have a kind of a peace, and enough of this. Come back. So both these, pravritti, the mind circling outward and the mind circling inside, are there in each and every phenomena you see in this world. Everything. And Shankaracharya, in his brilliant, you can see, introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, he uses these two, you can say, powers of the mind to explain the whole course of spirituality. In part, I'll read a few lines and then I'll explain it. Sa Bhagwan Srishtva idam jagat tasya cha stitim chikirshu marichadim agre srishtva prajapatin pravritti lakshanam dharmam grahiyamasa. So the Lord, after the Lord created this universe, the visible universe, the projection, he wanted to stabilize it. And so what he did was he created the first progenitors of mankind, called Marichi, etc. Marichi, Pulastaha, Pulaha, Kratu, all these great Atri, all these great, you can say, progenitors. Their job was to keep on furthering creation. Pushing. And you cannot just have a unidirectional, you can say, creation. Has to be pulled and pulled. The Lord created out of his mind the four boys. They are called the eternal boys. They were born pure. So Sanaka, Sanandana, Sanat Kumara, Sanat Sujata. They are four eternal boys. They lived the life of renunciation, nivritti, circling inwards. So both these, the one class of progenitors kept on furthering creation. And there are some who are saying, enough, I want to become a monk. And how do you do that? You get away from the senses. Get away from all the illusions where the mind goes towards the objects of the senses. You wean them away gradually. So the Lord, He created this Marichi, etc., the progenitors, in the pravritti dharma, the circling forward, and the nivritti, the 4 young eternal boys, circling inwards. Why? He is desirous of, as the text says, Jagata Sthitim Chikirshu, desiring a kind of a stability for this world. He created these 2 classes of beings characterized by external and the internal. Then he says, Dvivido hi vedokta dharma. The dharma, religion, characterized as Vedas. You must not look at it as a kind of a, this is Hinduism. It's not just that. Because if we look deeply into the Vedas, you will get all the religious doctrines there, either in an expanded form or in a seed form. All the religious ideas that humanity has manifested much later will be found there. So, you can look at religion in general. All religion. What is religion? Yeah, it's a search for the divine. That's religion. And the idea of the holy, religere, or that which binds. There are various interpretations. But dharma is not generally translated as religion. We do. Dharma is what holds things together. Like the inner characteristics of a thing. Fire burns. The dharma of fire is to burn. Water flows. The dharma of the water is to flow. And the wind blows. And dharma of the inner, you can say, constituent of wind is to blow. That's the internal soul of everything is dharma. That which holds things together. The haryate dharma. That which holds everything together. So, what holds everything together? Yes, dharma, and this dharma is characterized as these 2 forces, like I said. Religion, every religion has these 2 forces. You have the mystical element in every religion. People might not like the mystical element. You have mysticism. In Hinduism proper, we don't consider it mysticism. So what is mystery? What's the mystery about it? Nothing mysterious. Why should there be mystery in these things? It's an open book, you see it is. But you have Christian mystics, you have, and you have a long tradition of Christian mysticism. And you have Islamic mysticism. It is these few people that really act as a kind of a counterbalance. Too much of ritualism, too much of ceremony, too much of pomp, and too much of... There are some who say, enough. Let's sit down quietly and search within ourselves. So it's not just in Hinduism you had this pravritti and nivritti. Every religion, every form of you can say religious thought has these two currents. So, the Lord created these two propensities of the human mind, and like I said, it's not only the human mind, but each and everything follows these two rules. And he says, why? There are two main goals of human life. They are called prosperity, material prosperity, every type of prosperity is called abhyudhya. And the highest good, that's called liberation, that's called nishrayasa. So one leads to prosperity, and after a while, that ought to lead to renunciation. And then it leads to nishrayasa. That was a scheme of life in the old Vedic period. You start as a student, you marry, and then once the child is a little, capable of going to the ashrama to study, the parents leave that home, they go to the forest and they practice austerities, meditate, and finally they leave and they become sannyasins. That was the early. So pravritti going, circling forward gradually leads down to renunciation. There are some who from the very beginning, no, I don't want to go through this whole process. After the studentship, after the brahmacharya ashram, they simply go and become sannyasins. So they take up the life of renunciation. These are the two goals. And every kind of name, fame, every kind of prosperity, everything falls under this abhyudhya, worldly prosperity. And then, when everything between your fingers starts slipping away, when everything created by a great mind is lost, then the question comes, is this real? Like Swami Vivekananda, is this real? There we are. The question comes to everyone, and one must face it. And to face these teachings of the Gita fortify us in trying to face, is this real? I've had all these things. Now what? Then the mind recoils and leads one to the nishrayasa. So these are the two. When the Lord gave out these teachings in the beginning of creation, He now and then came to kind of repolish them or tailor them to the needs of that particular age. The Lord, who is the originator of this Yoga Shastra and Brahma Vidyanam, these two mighty traditions which are still in this world, He comes to protect these two traditions. Why does the Lord come as an avatar? To protect these two traditions. Now, to come back to the Bhagavad Gita proper, the second chapter especially, Arjuna was a hero. There was nothing that he was afraid of. He had tremendous strength and tremendous skills and tremendous, you can say, mental powers. And due to all the negotiations, falling apart, the two clans are going to engage in war. So one side is the Kauravas and one side is the Pandavas, the Kuru and the and this. They were from the Bharata's clan only. The sons of Pandu and this Kuru's clan. These were the 5 extraordinary brothers, and we have the 100 cousins, the Kauravas. And every scripture is allegorical. You can apply it in the external world, and you also need to apply it in the internal world. You can see that if a scripture is, genuine, it should allude to things which are going on inside you. So this Bhagavad Gita is teaching us about this war and this fighting, but it's talking about something within us. It's not just talking about the war and about Arjuna, the great hero. Suddenly, he sees his grandfather and his teachers and his cousins, and he swoons. His great bow slips out of his hand, and Sri Krishna starts scolding him. What happened to you? He came first. We have very cocky fighters. Sometimes they go to the ring and they jump about, and the opponent comes and he gives him one blow, and that cocky fighter is flat down. Arjuna was that cocky fighter. He came to the battlefield. I'm going to finish them off. And let me see who's going to oppose me. He's saying, place my chariot in the center between the 2 opposing armies, and let them see me, and I want to see them. There he was. And Sri Krishna smilingly, he was a charioteer. He places the chariot in the center of the warring, you can say, factions of the family, this family, big feud. And he collapses. So the first sloka, those who have the book, I'll read, can follow it, and I'll read it first in Sanskrit, and then I'll read the translation. Sanjaya Vacha Tam tata kripaya vishtam ashrupurna kulekshanam Vishidantamidam vakyam uvacha madhusudanaha. Yeah. Sanjaya uvacha. Sanjaya spoke. Sanjaya was a minister of the king Dhritarashtra. Dhritarashtra was a blind, you can say, the father, who had one faction of the, you can say, family as his sons, the 100 sons of Dhritarashtra. So he said, I want to know what exactly is going on there. I'm anxious. So Vyasa had said, okay, your minister Sanjaya, who was also his disciple, will have a kind of a divine vision. While you are in the palace, he will be able to see and hear everything, what's going on in the battlefield, and keep on relating it to you. So that's why it starts with Sanjaya Vacha, the second chapter, the first sloka. So Sanjaya says, what does he say? Tam, to him, to Arjuna. Sri Krishna spoke these words to him, Arjuna, who was thus overwhelmed with pity and drowned in distress, and whose eyes were drenched in tears of despondency. Here we have a hero, and everything is, all his heroism has just been, dissipated. And it reminds us, when crisis, we also come across crisis in our life. We also fall from the ideal. We too become despondent. We too who were depending on our strength, finally are crushed. And we are like finished. So here's Arjuna. Madhusudana. Madhusudana is an epithet of Sri Krishna because he who slew the demon Madhu. That's one of the names of. So, Kripaya Avishtam. Avishta is to something, pity has kind of entered into his mind. He was a heroic warrior, and it's like he is now, attacked by pity. Avishta means technically it means like he's sorrowful, and his eyes are brimming with tears. That's all. So Madhusudan said these words to him who was thus sorrowing. This is the burden of the first sloka, first stanza of the Bhagavad Gita. So here you have Arjuna on the chariot and Sri Krishna as a charioteer. You have to have a charioteer or you can't, fight from the chariot. They were called the Rathis and Maharathis. We'll get down to explaining what these terms mean. Sri Krishna had kind of reached a compromise in a way that he had his army. He was a mighty warrior, chieftain, a king. And he said, when both the parties had come, Duryodhana and Arjuna, he's saying, okay, I do not fight. You have all my arms and my armies and everything. So you have to choose between this. Arjuna chose the unarmed Sri Krishna. He's saying it's better to have Sri Krishna with us. And all the rest of the army of Sri Krishna was sent to the side of the Kauravas. They already had a massive army. It became even more massive. I mean, technically, it's a foolish decision if you look at it. That army has swelled the enemy's army. And here you have Arjuna. He is content with just Sri Krishna unarmed. And what? He is going to be a charioteer. But at least Arjuna, before this state of mind, he had an insight that Sri Krishna is a divine being, a friend of mine. And it's good to have God on your side than your armies. So Arjuna chose God to be there with him. And so Duryodhana, his cousin, the king, was mighty happy. My ranks have swelled and we are going to massacre them. So here you have Sri Krishna on the chariot, as a charioteer. He is not going to lift any arms. And everyone knew his prowess. If he takes up arms, there's no one to save us. So here he is there, and Arjuna collapsed. In the first chapter, the kind of my body is feverish, my great bow Gandiva has slipped out of my hands. I cannot stand, I'm seeing all omens. Please let me off this kind of duty of this. And Sri Krishna has begun scolding him. And the scolding continues here in the second chapter also, partly. And then here we have he spoke. The Lord spoke to Arjuna. What did he speak? We'll get it in the second and the third stanzas. But here we have a person whose dependence on his own strength was crushed. And that is what actually happens. When a person who depends on his own strength, depends on his own ego, depends on his own skill, there's no need for any divine intervention. Oh, really? There you are. And the world shows you where exactly you stand. And when all these inimical forces come and flatten you down, throw you off, then you start understanding that yes, it was foolish of me to depend on just my strength. I should have depended on God. So everything that Arjuna had learned so far, he had to undergo the process of unlearning. And this is the beauty of spiritual life. You may be a big scientist, but when you come down to the brass tacks of spiritual life, you are a baby. Oh yes. And everybody tells you, you don't do this thing right, you cannot sit right, you cannot stand, you don't walk like a monk, you don't talk like a monk, what do you mean? And then you as a baby need to hold the hands of the mother. And this is where here this Bhagavad Gita is called the mother. Amba tvam anusandadami. I meditate on you, O mother. She is that divine mother in the form of this teachings. And this Bhagavad Gita now is ready to be taught to one who has done away with all his qualifications and everything. It reminds me of Swami Vivekananda. He was like a kind of a blazing sword. And Sri Ramakrishna just touches him, and how could he, smash my hardened mind in a kind of second, in a blink of an eye. And he was very careful. Next time I go, I'm not going to let anything overpower me. And again, Sri Ramakrishna comes and touches, and there again. Master Mahasai, who was the, you can say, recorder of the gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, he too, he goes, and then he says, my God, he's saying 3 times his ego was crushed. And here we have a person who is now ready to learn. So Arjuna is now ready to learn. He does, of course, now and then pose some questions. Why is this and why is that? In a way, he is helping us to eradicate certain doubts in our mind, makes things clear. So, Madhusudana Uvacha, Madhusudan spoke, Sri Krishna spoke these words to Arjuna, Tam, to him, who was grieving, whose eyes are full of tears, and, as we say, filled with pity, like pity had entered him. This is a perfect, you can say, candidate for something higher to be given to him. The second, we have a little time, we will chant the second stanza, and in the next class we will continue with this second and third. For now we will chant it, and I will explain the Sanskrit mantra, Shri Bhagavan Vacha Kutastva Kashmalamidam Vishame Samupastitam Anarya Jushtamaswargyam Akirtim Karamarjuna. Shri Bhagavan spoke. We will come down to what Arjuna means and what Bhagavan means. Arjuna means one who is pure. And Bhagavan means, briefly, is one who has, Bhagavan, one who has the 6 celestial powers. Jnana, Aishwarya, Shakti, Virya, Teja. So Bhagat, these are called the 6 Bhagat. He has untrammeled power. One who has this untrammeled 6 divine powers is called Bhagavan. And the first thing he says, Kutastva Kashmalamidam. Where has this unmanly, heaven-barring and shameful dejection come upon you at this juncture? Oh Arjuna, here you have. People like to have kind of some sweet words. People in Swami Vivekananda, they say, people want to have some comfortable religion. If you want comfort, please don't come to religion. It will turn you inside out, show you what you are, and now pick up the pieces and let's start. This is what happened. He was grieving. Anyone could have had a word or two of, you can say, consolation to this mighty hero. Nothing. He never consoled him with anything. He scolded him, berated him, trying to arouse that spirit within him. So Kuta, from where? Twa is in you. Kashmalam, many people translate it as, you can say, heaven barring or something like that. But what happens is, we have a nature and that is superimposed by certain weaknesses, certain wrong perceptions, certain wrong cognitions, and that is kind of a covering over us. So where has this covering, this wrong knowledge has come upon you? And where we're saying, at this juncture, when you are supposed to exhibit the highest, you can say, spirit of a warrior, where has all these things come upon you? And he makes another significant, Anaryam. You are not an Aryan. We will pronounce it as Aryan. You are not an Aryan. Is an Aryan a race? No. And Arya is a one who is cultured. But one who has spiritual culture. Manu says that a child born of lust is an anarya. A child born out of prayers and purity is an arya. It starts from there. We have a prenatal disposition towards either good or evil. Depends on the mother's thoughts. Yes, the fetus is open to all types of, you can say, influences. And the mother's thoughts are important. A child born with those wrong characteristics is an anarya. A child born of prayers and fasting, like we have in the life of Vivekananda. His mother fasted and prayed and worshipped. And there we have a person is predisposed to either good or evil. Yes, there's no point in, Swami Vivekananda says, in raising the police force. You cannot keep all these people down. They are made for evil. And that's what it was, the Anarya. The people made for good, for spiritual culture, for higher knowledge, were called Aryas. It has nothing to do with race, it has nothing to do with language, nothing at all. So the first thing he says, Anaryam, is a kind of a shock. His mother Kunti was the purest of all, you can say, mothers, one of the purest of them. And he's kind of Anariyan. And he's saying, Ajustam asvargyam means this will not lead you to heaven. It's not, you can say, divine. It's not heavenly. It's nothing. You are like a worm, in other words, you can say that. It's the worm. See your behavior. The first thing he does is, where has this dejection come upon you at this juncture? And akirti, it will bring infamy. Akirti kara. Arjuna, if he would have just let go and he would have been dragged by the circumstances, nobody would have listened to him, or nobody would have even opened his book. The guy ran away, that guy was killed, or that guy was a coward. We don't want a coward teaching us things. We want strength. And this is to rouse that spirit. It's saying it's a swargam. It is, even if you die in battle doing your duty, you attain heaven. If you die meditating, you also attain the heaven. Okay? So each person has his own duties. They were called varna, ashrama, you can say duties, dharma. So Sri Krishna is very clear. He is not giving any consolation. He is trying to break that, you can say, the mold, his self-pity. We generally, nobody bothers about me. I am so miserable. And this person is responsible, that person is responsible. They don't know how much struggle, how much pain I suffer. Nothing. You are just wallowing in self-pity. You will have to come out of that. And stand up. And firm on your feet. And be a hero once again. Not only to win this war, but to win the inner war. The war that is constantly raging within. So this Mahabharata and this great battle and this Gita is likened to that war there between. And the 5 brothers, the 5 senses they say, and the 100 other cousins, the warring cousins, they are simply, they are the evil tendencies, and the Lord sides with you if you are there, if you take refuge in Him. And later on we will find Arjuna takes refuge in the Lord, and then the Gita proper commences, as I say. Okay? So we stop here today. We resume this sacred scripture on the 21st. That's Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.